Hey guys, Salute here. So Antorus just dropped, and my guild just cleared heroic last night, and so I figured for this tier, rather than just putting out kill videos, I thought I'd take each fight as an opportunity to explain a little bit, maybe make a sort of guide from a healer's perspective, kind of detailing the relevant mechanics and little tips and tricks I've seen already in the early days of this tier. I'll be breaking this series into 4 parts. For this video, it'll be the first 3 bosses: Grothy Worldbreaker, Spellhounds of Sargeras, and Tauren High Command. The others will follow shortly after this one, but let's just get into this. So right off the bat, we have Grothy Worldbreaker, and before I get into anything, I will say that if you're looking for a guide on how to do these fights, this is not the video for you. I'll be going strictly from a healer's perspectives on these fights, and I'll be assuming that a general working knowledge of the mechanics is already had by the viewer, you. So in general, the first fight of the instance, as usual, doesn't have too much going on with it. Tank damage in this fight is pretty mediocre, except when they're kiting Fell Bombardment. You have to keep an eye on them sometimes, because if the tank does run out of space or mistimes his kiting, then it can snowball, and they'll get hit by 1, and then get hit by 2, and then you can start seeing maybe a tank death if you don't have an external or some pretty heavy spot healing. So that's something to keep an eye on. In general, decimations can target anybody in the raid. There's no melee specific or range specific decimation. It's just everybody in the raid except tanks. At least I didn't see any tanks get targeted. So you have to make sure you're kiting that away from the raid. And then after your first Apocalypse drive, assuming you killed the Annihilation Cannon, which a lot of people are doing, you'll see 5 to 6, depending on your raid, decimations go off from then on. Fat Boss detailed a lot of clump and run strats, but my guild, we just had everybody spread out and not be idiots, so it was pretty simple. Before you destroy the Annihilation Cannon, you need to be ready to spot heal people after they take Soak and Annihilation. The damage is pretty minimal, and there's not much follow-up damage. For healers, you have to be aware of the Apocalypse Drive. Holy Priests can save people by pulling them out of the Surging Fell, which are the lines of death on the ground. Other than that, it's pretty simple. Just get out of the poop mechanic. And then the biggest thing for healers is the Luring Destruction. Luring Destruction followed by Eradication can actually do quite a bit of damage if people get greedy and don't come back, like the Ruptured Realities on Fallen Avatar from the last tier. So it is a really good time to coordinate healing CDs. We didn't coordinate CDs on normal heroic because we were blowing through it, but I'm sure if it is presenting challenges, that'd be a great time for the 3 minutes. So with respect to Paladins, Grothy Worldbreaker is a pretty interesting fight. Having to run out the decimations constantly keeps you on your toes, while Luring Destruction followed by Eradication is a big burst of damage that we get to heal up. Specifically for Paladin talents on this fight, I would recommend Bestow Faith. Light's Hammer isn't going to do as much healing as Bestow Faith will. The only time people are grouped up is during right after the Eradication, but everybody's going to be running right out of your Light's Hammer as soon as you drop it, so I'd recommend Bestow Faith. Rule of Law is great since everybody's spread out quite a bit. I'd recommend Devotion Aura or Sacrifice, one of the two, depending on your playstyle. Mercy isn't going to do that much for you on this fight. It's just not enough ticking damage on the raid to warrant the ticking healing of Mercy. Holy Avenger is going to be great. It's going to do more healing than Holy Prism will, and the fight is not long enough to merit Divine Purpose. Judgment Light is great. There's only the one target. Everybody's going to be attacking it, so you'll consume all your charges of Judgment Light immediately. Sanctified Wrath is okay, but the extended duration of Avenging Wrath isn't going to really benefit you that much. And then Beacon of Faith is great since both tanks will be taking damage either through Fell Bombardment or tanking the boss.
Well, there's really nothing happening other than lines, huh?
Yeah.
Jesus, Toby, what happened to you there? So up next, after Grothy Worldbreaker, is Spellhounds of Sargeras. The fight is pretty complicated for a second fight of an instance, but it can be simplified greatly if you just break down the abilities by color and consider all the purple abilities require you to stack, while all the orange abilities require you to spread. So if you keep that in mind, everything will be a ton simpler. For healers specifically, the energy abilities. For the purple ability is the consuming sphere, and it'll throw it out at a random direction. Super big pain in the ass, especially for our mobile healers like myself as a paladin. You're just getting pulled into the sphere all the time, and you just got to cast move, cast move. It's a great time for effects like Rapture or Spirit Walker's Grace if you're a shaman. Hand of Freedom, unfortunately, does not grant freedom from this ability. Just a waste of a GCD at that point. The orange ability, or Friharg's ability, is to draw a line and shoot a bunch of shit at a player. Watch the people who are targeted by this ability, as if they are low and they get hit by this, it will do a significant amount of damage to them. You also need to be careful in that if there's 2 or 3 overlapping on the melee pack, they will take a ton of damage. We lost a few people on our heroic pull, or our normal pull actually, even just from somebody standing in 3 of them and getting one shot. So then in heroic mode, at 66 energy, there's another set of abilities where the purple ability for this is the Weight of Darkness, where everybody would be ideally stacked up to split the fear that would be coming out. But in general, you just need 2 to 3. There's no impact on healers for this specifically, but if somebody does get feared, it could mess up the rest of the mechanics. And if you yourself get feared, then obviously you're not going to be doing any healing. So keep an eye on that. The orange ability is Molten Touch, which is rather impactful. It'll pick up a couple people and do heavy, moderate damage on them. And then after a few seconds, they'll shoot out orange bolts at the raid where people are standing. So it's important that the raid dodges this and you're able to heal anybody who might not get out of the way, while also keeping a big eye on the players with Molten Touch, because they are taking a heavy amount of damage. And then the 100 energy abilities for purple are the siphons, or the corruptions. So Siphon Corruption is purple, and basically if the whole raid can just remain stacked, it's pretty simple. It doesn't do that much damage on normal or heroic. Just a couple of players get debuffed and split damage among everybody, while small ticking damage is going out on the raid. So if you just have the whole raid stacked up in an SLT or a barrier, it's just a pretty unimpactful mechanic. The orange one is the exact opposite, where there'll be raid ticking damage and people get debuffed, but they want to not stack. Remember, purple is stack, orange is flee. So those are all the mechanics in the fight. And throughout the fight, you'll be dealing with overlaps, because the Fellhounds start with different energy levels. And the biggest one that's of consequence to healers is the Siphon Corruption plus Molten Touch, because Siphon Corruption will require the raid to stack, while Molten Touch, if the raid is stacked, will bombard that spot with fire bolts. Not fell anymore. So it's really important that the raid is coordinated at that point, as you want the raid to stack and maybe an SLT or a barrier just to heal through the Siphon Corruption damage, and then move as a team to another designated spot as the Molten Touch bolts come down. It requires a bit of coordination, but it's not that impactful, really, to be honest. The other maybe sort of shitty overlap for a healer, or the player who got it, is the what would it be? It'd be Inflamed Corruption plus Weight of Darkness, because if you're inflamed, you need to be away from people, but Weight of Darkness requires you to stack. So it's great if people can use immunities at that point, like Ice Block, or in my case, Bubble if I'm a paladin. Otherwise, it is far better, we found, for the players to still stack in the Weight of Corruption debuff bubble and just heal through the inflamed damage that comes out, because the inflamed damage isn't astronomical or anything, and it's way better to have that than somebody running around feared for 18 seconds. You can just heal up the players as they take the damage from inflamed. So in general, it's a pretty complicated fight. As you can see, going through each of the mechanics takes several minutes. However, if you just remember the basic mantra of orange is spread, purple is stacked, you'll automatically be in a better position than 40% of the raid groups out there. Don't overcomplicate this fight. The only overlap, that really matters is that Siphon Corruption Molten Touch, and even then it just requires stacking and moving to a different spot. So for Fellhounds, with respect to Paladins, it's a pretty good fight. We get to make great use of our Beacon of Faith, which I highly recommend that you take. It's a fight that we, as Paladins, instead of being in the melee pack, will likely want to be in the range pack. Depending on your raid comp, obviously, if you're extremely heavy on melee, stick with the melee. But I found, personally, during our 2 kills on this boss so far, that the ranged were nice and clumped also. So we had a lot more range than we did melee on the fight, so standing in the range made sense for our mastery. You're gonna really want to take Bestow Faith on this fight instead of Light's Hammer. I feel like Light's Hammer is a bit of a trap on this fight. You're gonna want to throw it down during some of the overlaps, but I guess if you're smart with it, you can make better use of it. Because the raid will be stacked at times and taking ticking damage, which is kind of the great thing for Light's Hammer, but half the time people are going to run right out of Light's Hammer because of the inflamed debuffs going out. Rule of Law is great, again. Just the raid's pretty spread out, and keeping up the mastery as well as the increased range is great. Cavalier could have a role to play here, but Rule of Law is just better in all senses. Devotion Aura and Aura of Sacrifice, again, are going to outperform Aura of Mercy, and it's just a matter of your playstyle. I would not recommend taking Holy Prism on this fight, and Holy Avenger is just going to be straight up better. Judgment of Light, again, is going to be better than Signified Wrath, but you have to be careful on this fight because you have to make sure you're targeting the right Fellhound. I would recommend targeting the one that the melee are attacking, just because you're going to guarantee that you're consuming all those charges. Whereas if everybody's stacking the Orange Hound and you judge the yellow or the Purple Hound, then your Judgment Light sacks are just going to go unused. And then, as I mentioned earlier, Beacon of Faith is king on this fight. It's the perfect usage because both tanks are going to be taking a lot of damage throughout the entire fight. So after Fellhounds, you go fight the Antoran High Command. And there's a lot going on in this fight mechanically, but for healers, it's pretty specific. There's mainly three things that we need to deal with. The first of which is Chief Engineer Ishkar, while in his pod, will be throwing mines near players, which detonate after a little bit. Or if once equipped, people run over them, they'll explode. And this does a pretty heavy amount of initial damage and a pretty nasty dot on the entire raid. So if you get people running over 5 or 6 mines, you have 6 stacks of this pretty heavy dot, and it might require some healing cooldowns or just throughput cooldowns in general. A thing to note about this is something that was posted on Wowhead the other day. It's not in the dungeon journal, but after a while, the mines will self-detonate. Especially near the fight on heroic mode. We didn't see it on normal mode, but I think we killed the boss a little too fast. So it's important that whoever is in General Eridus's pod clear the mines as much as possible. This may be a bug, or it may be working as intended, but either way, the pod goers can do their job and clear the mines, and it will reduce the healing a lot. Also, for the healers to deal with in this encounter is an ability called Fusillade, which is a heavy AoE bombardment from the Paraxis, which is called in to the encounter. To counter this ability, pod goers in the engineer pod place Fell Shield emitters on the ground, and a healer designated by the raid group or anybody can click this emitter and generate a barrier that will protect you from Fusillade, or at least reduce the damage. The tricky thing about this ability is actually the timing of this ability, because the Praxis comes in and darkens the whole room, which is a cool effect, but gives you the impression that the ability is happening right then, but it's not. She'll still cast the ability Fusillade, and then when she starts casting Fusillade, you want to click the emitter, because clicking the emitter is not instantaneous, it actually has a cast time. So when she starts casting Fusillade, you click the emitter and then everything will be fine. Otherwise, timing will be a bit off and you'll take either early or late ticks depending on if you clicked early or late. So the final healer consideration in the Antoran encounter is the fact that the people in the pods doing all those mechanics are taking a stacking debuff called Psychic Assault, which does ever increasing damage the longer they're in the pod. But they're in the pod, which is considered a vehicle, which bugs out a lot of raid frames, so you can't actually heal them because they're in the vehicle. So the workaround I'm using, and a lot of people in my guild are using, is that I have a key combination that set target focus. So whoever's going in will call out that they're going in, and I'm sure in Mythic we'll have a set rotation, so we'll know exactly what's going on. But you just set them as your focus, and then you can heal the focus frame rather than healing the raid frame. So I view the Antoran High Command encounter with respect to Paladins as kind of the first disappointment of Antorus. We, because of our strong spot healing, are never going to be the ones going into the pod. We're needed to keep the tank stable as well as keep the person who's suffering from Psychic Assault stable, and just our spot healing is too good to warrant us going in. On farm, we'll go in, but during progression, I don't think any paladins will be the ones going into the pod, which is a little disappointing, but that's all right. With respect to talents, this will be the first encounter where Light's Hammer might actually start outperforming Bestow Faith. The raid will be clumped and inevitably taking ticking damage as people trip over mines. So it's kind of a great use of Light's Hammer, but Bestow Faith is also great. Rule of Law is going to be the talent taken on 30 row. The other two are completely unnecessary on this fight. Cavalier, there's very little movement, so you should be fine with your one charge. This is also the first fight, I would say, that all 3 auras have a place. I could see all 3 being taken. Dev Aura has extremely strong damage reduction as usual, so popping Aura Mastery during a Fusillade can further reduce the damage taken, while on the other hand, or Sacrifice, if you pop Aura Mastery during that, you can see some very big numbers and heal the raid right back up. And then Mercy will be good because the constant ticking damage of people tripping over mines will result in high Mercy healing. For the 75 row, Holy Avenger is better than the other talents. Holy Prism is fine, but it won't do as much healing as Holy Avenger. And then the fights are short enough that Divine Purpose isn't needed. 90, Judgment of Light, no brainer here. One target, so you can't even judge the wrong target. And Sanctified Wrath isn't going to do as much healing as Judgment of Light will. And then for level 100, Beacon of Faith is great, as I alluded to earlier. You can beacon the pod target and heal the main tank, since the off tank is taking very little damage. At the end, when they're at very high stacks of this Psychic Assault, the beacon transfer will be insufficient to actually keep them up, and you'll need to heal them directly. So that's it for the first 3 bosses in Antorus. I enjoyed them. I think Fellhound is a great fight. Antorin, we have a really good niche as paladins with the pod healing, and then Grothy Worldbreaker is a fine open air fight. If you did enjoy this video, please drop a like or subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you guys in the next video.